Welcome to the set of Radio Rufus, a brand new podcast, but with the look and feel of a 1960s radio station. And it's the perfect opportunity for me to put Blackmagic's new micro studio camera 4K G2 to the test, because this set is a 360-degree immersive set. Every single part of it is designed to be seen on camera, which I must admit presented a bit of a challenge for me when I was the one tasked with creating a highly functional 5-camera live vision mix podcast setup without any of the tech being seen on camera. But I cannot express enough how good the end result is and how well everything turned out. And I can't wait to share that with you. And that is what I'll be doing in the second half of this video. I'm going to give a full breakdown of the studio setup that we've got here. But in the first half, I want to give a bit of an overview of what the Micro Studio Camera 4K G2 is and everything that you need to know about it. So let's head back to my studio now for that.
Let's talk about the obvious thing first, which of course is its size. It's absolutely tiny, but it's crazy to think that we've got essentially a studio camera. You could call it a cinema camera though, because it's got all of the same things that you would find in a cinema camera sitting in the palm of my hand, weighing at just 300 grams. And it is a 4K powerhouse. It's got the same sensor, the same color science, the same dynamic range, and the same quality in the camera that I'm using to film this video right now, which is a Blackmagic Studio Camera 4K Pro. And that actually comes as a benefit, because it means if you've got an existing Blackmagic camera, whether it be the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K or the Blackmagic Studio Camera 4K line, you can mix it with a Micro Studio Camera 4K G2, and you're not having to worry about, will the shots match up? Will the colors look different? Looking at ports and connections on the camera SDI first, you get two 12G micro BNC connections, one for SDI in, the other for SDI out, and they support 3840 by 2160, so Ultra HD, 4K up to 60 frames per second. And I think a lot of people will use these cameras in SDI workflows. But what Blackmagic didn't talk about, I personally feel, too much, was the fact that on the other side, there is an HDMI port. Now, it doesn't support 4K output. It is limited to only 1080p up to 60 frames per second. But it does mean you can use this camera with HDMI-based workflows, so this will work great with ATEM Minis, ATEM Mini Extremes, ATEM Mini Pros. This will work. And the other thing I don't think they shouted about enough is the fact that, yes, you get Blackmagic's camera control protocol over the SDI. That is what the SDI in, or the return SDI, is for. But you also get it with the HDMI as well. So if you do connect this up to your ATEM Mini Pro, your ATEM Mini Extreme using a single HDMI cable, it will create that bi-directional connection. So then not only is it sending the video and the audio to the switcher, but it's sending all the ancillary data back from the switcher to the camera. And that's how you get things like the tally light, time code, the ability to control the lens, the camera control, and the color calibration of the camera. So it does work with HDMI-based workflows and not just SDI workflows. You also get a 3.5mm microphone input if you want to use external microphones or sources. And on the other side, you have a USB Type-C connector, 3.1 up to 5 gigabits per second. And we'll talk more about that in a second, about how that can be used, because I think this opens up a lot of functionality for the camera. Now, I do just want to give a quick mention to the great mounting solutions on this camera, because we use that a lot in the build you're going to see later on in this video. There is a 1/4-inch tripod thread at the top, and on the bottom, 3 1/4-inch tripod threads. And I like the ability to mount this camera from both the top and the bottom. On the side, there is a on-off button at the bottom, 4 buttons for navigating through the menus, and a record button on the top, because you can record with this camera, and we'll come on to that in just a second. And the final really only thing to mention here is power. There's 2 ways to power this camera. You can use the 12-volt DC locking connector to continuously power the cable from a wall, or you've got a battery slot here where you can use a Canon LP E6 style battery, and you can actually use those at the same time for a bit of redundancy. So if you have a fully charged battery in the back and you're powering this from the wall, if the power gets disconnected or you have a power cut, it will automatically fail over to the battery and continue running until either the battery dies or you add DC power back in. Before we move on to the studio build itself, I do just want to take 1 second to talk about the USB-C port in this camera, because it is a key feature and I think it's going to open up a lot of possibilities in the future for what you can do with it. So firstly, I imagine that 90% of people that get this camera are going to use the USB-C port for one thing and one thing only, and that is connecting up an external media drive to enable recording onto that external disk. And it is as simple as taking a USB SSD, for example, connecting it up to the USB-C port, and it will appear and you can record straight onto it. But you can do other things with this USB-C port. One example being that Blackmagic's focus and zoom demands are compatible with this camera. So you can connect those up and then control your lens's zoom and focus remotely. Another example is you can actually attach a USB-C to Ethernet adapter and connect this camera up to your network. Now you might ask, why would you want to do that? And there's two main reasons. One, which I don't think you and I really need to worry about right now, but it is interesting for the future of this camera. And that is, this is the first camera that Blackmagic has enabled the REST protocol, which basically allows developers to control the settings of this camera using simple HTTP requests over the network. What that means for you and me is that in the future, we're probably going to see a lot more apps being developed and enable us to download and use that give the ability to control this camera over the network without needing to use something like the ATEM software control. But the second more interesting thing I think for us as users right now is Blackmagic have enabled the ability to actually access the hard drive that you connect to the USB-C port over the network as well. And what that means is you can basically now connect a hard drive up to this camera and leave it in at all times and access and offload the footage via the network, rather than you having to unplug the SSD hard drive every time you want to offload your footage. And so you could offload your footage over the network onto your computer, onto a NAS, onto a Blackmagic cloud store. The possibilities are kind of endless. And they've enabled you to do this in 3 ways. They've created a web dashboard, a web media server. So you just type in the web address into Google Chrome, for example, and access the footage that way. They've enabled FTP so that you can, similar to how it works on the HyperDeck, you can access the hard drive via an FTP server. And the one that I'm excited about is they've enabled SMB sharing as well on the camera, similar to how it works with the Blackmagic Cloud Store. And I can already see that in the near future, people will write scripts, or there'll be automation created to enable you to, say, for example, do a shoot with an ATEM Mini and these cameras, and when you finish or stop recording, or at a certain point during the day over the network, you can offload automatically. It will connect to all of these cameras and it will pull the 4K raw footage over the network off of these cameras and put it on your NAS automatically, let's say, and it does that 3 times a day at a set scheduled time. There's loads of possibilities with here, and you can see kind of I'm getting excited and throwing up all of these ideas. I think Blackmagic have opened the door with this camera, and hopefully they bring it into future cameras to do even more things and to be even more experimental with the workflows and the way we use these things. So that USB-C port, it might be a tiny little thing, but it does excite me with the possibilities that it brings. 2 quick things to note if you're going to want to try this yourself and connect the camera up to a network. The first one being that you are going to need to download Blackmagic's camera utility software to enable the network features in this camera. By default, the cameras come shipped with them disabled for additional security. The other thing I would recommend if you're going to put multiple of these cameras on the network is go into that utility software and give each camera a unique name, and that way they will get a unique address on the network that you can use to access them. The second thing is you might say, well, Alex, there's only one USB-C port on the side of the camera, so how are you connecting a Ethernet dongle and an SSD drive at the same time? And I can confirm you can use USB-C hubs like this one. This is a Ugreen 7-in-1 hub. You can connect that up to the camera and then plug in your Ethernet connection and your hard drive, and it works absolutely fine. I've been doing that no problem at all. So now you know what this little thing is capable of. Let's go back to the 1960s Radio Rufus studio and show you how I've installed 5 of these along with an ATEM Mini Extreme ISO to create a fully immersive 360 degrees podcast studio with cinematic quality, and a few of the little tips and tricks that I picked up already with using these things. But before that, let's talk live streaming with the sponsor of today's video, LiveView. LiveView allows you to deliver exceptional live video coverage anytime and anywhere thanks to their innovative hardware encoders and cutting-edge cellular bonding technology. This is their latest portable bonding encoder, the LiveView Solo Pro. Now, it might look small, but this thing is packed full of power. In fact, it's exactly the same technology used by the biggest news and sports broadcasters, but adapted to work perfectly for digital content creators. The version I have here has both HDMI and SDI inputs, allowing you to stream in full 4K at up to 60 frames per second with network bonding for top quality and ultra reliable streaming from anywhere in the world. The Solo Pro even has HEVC encoding, meaning you can stream at higher quality without needing as much bandwidth, which is key if you're somewhere with limited internet. It has a 3-hour internal battery and USB-C charging, making it the perfect tool for if you're needing to stream while on the move. Speaking of internet, you can connect the Solo Pro using Ethernet and Wi-Fi, but where it really comes alive is the fact that you can also plug in up to 4 4G or 5G USB modems. This ensures a high quality, reliable stream from anywhere, every time, especially with their Solo Pro Connect kit that comes with 2 modems with SIM cards, unlimited data, and LRT included. You can then use LiveView Reliable Transport, or LRT for short, to send your stream out over a bonded internet connection. The benefit of doing this is that the LiveView Solo Pro will constantly monitor each connection and distribute the network traffic effectively across all connections to make sure your live stream stays rock solid even in the toughest of network conditions. It also adds a layer of redundancy for those critical live streams that can't go off air. With network bonding, if someone was to accidentally pull out your Ethernet cable, the LiveView Solo Pro will continue to stream out over the remaining connections and your live viewers would be none the wiser. So if you're looking for a reliable portable encoder with full 4K low latency streaming, then check out the new LiveView Solo Pro and the rest of LiveView's groundbreaking streaming devices using the link in my description below. We're back in the 1960s Radio Rufus studio, so let's talk about the setup that I've implemented here. And I want to start by talking about the challenges that this particular project has. The first one actually being size, the space that we've got to work with. It's remarkably tiny, even though it does look big on camera. It's just 3 meters by 3 meters squared. And then when the set designers put all of their stuff in, that greatly gets reduced. So that basically meant for me, there was no way we were going to be able to have large studio cameras on tripods. I was going to have to get creative about the cameras that I chose, the lenses, and the way we mounted things as well. That's the first thing. The second was, and I mentioned it at the beginning of the video, the client was very specific that this set needed to be a fully immersive 360-degree set so they could shoot from any angle, and it had that sort of fly on the wall feel.
And
And basically that would be fine, but you don't want to ruin the 1960s illusion either. So they were very specific that they didn't really want to see any of the modern day technology, any of the cameras, the vision mixer, etc. in any of the shots either. So we'll come on to how I hid some of that away in just a second. The third thing is, to add on to that, the actual producer of the show, the person who's live vision mixing the show in real time, also is part of the show itself. So they needed to be on camera and using the modern day technology without it being seen on camera. So I'll talk about how I got around some of that as well. The final two things are the client, who is the Fellows Studios. They're the UK's fastest growing podcast network. I've done a video about them, about how I built their F1 The Last Lap setup. They are very used to high quality content, high quality cameras, high quality sound, and they didn't want to sacrifice on any of that, why would they, for this build. So the products that I chose had to still deliver the very, very top quality for them. And finally, and arguably the most important as well, everything needed to be easy to use so that a producer could just come in, sit down, press on, and start recording straight away without having to do a whole lot of setup or settings changes. So what did I go with to make all this happen? Well, you already know the camera. The Micro Studio Camera 4K G2 was really the perfect choice because it's small and can be easily hidden away. We've actually got 5 of these hidden around the set. One single shot on Rufus, the main presenter.
Welcome to Radio Rufus. This is the latest and greatest in a frankly...
One single on Aidan, the producer.
Metal-edged, suited-up white man have said.
One guest single, and 2 super wide angles mounted in each corner to really help us show off the whole studio and to allow us to capture if the talent were to stand up or start walking around the set. It's a 360-degree set, as I keep saying, so we want the talent to know that they can go anywhere within the set or do anything without the worry about whether it will be picked up on camera or not. Each camera is mounted into the set using these fantastic Elgato wall mounts. I'll leave a link in the description below to all of the kit that's been used for this set build. This is where having the multiple tripod mounts on the camera becomes really useful because it gives you a bunch of possibilities and flexibilities for mounting these cameras. Then all I have plugged into the camera is its 12-volt DC power, and I found these right-angled thin HDMI cables to keep everything as low profile as possible with as minimal wires on show. And for each camera I just drilled a small hole into the set to run all the cables through to the back of the set, and you end up with this super clean setup. Now in the future, I might add in a USB-C extension cable for each of the cameras that can run to the back of the set, where I can then plug in a hard drive and an Ethernet dongle to connect this up to the network and do what we were talking about earlier with offloading footage over the network, but that isn't needed right now for these guys. I want to pass on a few quick tips in terms of things I did in the menu of the camera to get this working for an ATEM workflow. So the first thing is, if you're going to be using this with an HDMI-based ATEM workflow, go into the menu of the camera, go to the monitor menu and turn on clean feed. This will then get rid of all the on-screen displays so that you're sending just a clean HDMI feed to your ATEM switcher. Equally, if you're going to be using the Micro Studio Camera 4K G2 with an SDI-based workflow, don't forget to go into the setup menu of the camera and make sure you assign the correct ATEM camera ID to the camera. So whatever SDI port you're plugging it into, if you're plugging it into SDI in number 5, make sure you go into the setup menu on the camera and change that to number 5 so that all of the tally light and the data is all that's sent back to the camera is all correct. Now, one thing I actually did for this particular build as well, because it is designed to be more of a fly on the wall type thing, is I went into the setup menu and disabled the tally light so that the talent isn't sitting here seeing red on-air lights dart around the room and getting distracted. But that might be something that you don't want to do and you want to have a tally light for your particular setup. Underneath this producer desk, I built a mini rack setup to house all of the broadcast equipment. And we designed the set in a way so that this corner right here is the only corner that will never be caught on camera, so the rack lives underneath there. And we've also added a little access hatch so that we can easily run cables from the outside of the set into the back of the rack. Now, I tried to keep the rack as small and simple as possible, but still be one self-contained unit that gives us all of the functionality that we need to run a show. At the bottom of the rack, we have the Behringer X32 audio mixer. Feeding into that is 3 of these Shure Super 55 Deluxe microphones connected via XLR to give the very vintage look, but with the top high quality sound that these microphones give. They are absolutely fantastic. Then I've also run 3 individual XLR outputs from the mixer to these Behringer PM1 units, which I've mounted underneath the table at each of the seating positions so that each talent can have an individual headphone mix. Now, it is worth saying that the X32 mixer probably is a bit overkill for this particular setup, but the reason that I've used it is because it's the one that the client knows and uses across all of their podcasts, and all of their producers are trained on that mixer, so it made sense to also apply it into this setup as well. Also, one of the great things about the X32 is it is controllable over the network, and we use that quite heavily, as you'll come to see later when we talk about the Stream Deck and BigFocus Companion. Of course, don't forget what I mentioned earlier as well. All of the broadcasting tech needs to be hidden away. We can't have a big audio mixing desk here on the producer desk. So the X32 works well for that as well, because it can be hidden away in the rack and we can use the Stream Deck to control it over the network. Above the X32 is an ATEM Mini Extreme ISO. The 5 cameras are connected to that via fiber HDMI. For the 2 HDMI outputs, one feeds a screen at the producer desk for the multi-view, the other feeds the on-set monitor, both of which are fitted into these custom-built units to help hide the modern technology. To bring audio from the mixer into the ATEM, it's as simple as taking 2 XLR outputs from the X32, with a cable that converts to a 3.5mm stereo jack on the end and plugging that into, in my case, mic 2 input on the ATEM Mini. Now I do put a slight delay on the outputs in the X32 to help sync all the audio up so everything is in sync with the camera picture. The other thing to mention with the ATEM Mini that I do, which is more of an ease of use thing, but it's a really nice thing to do with your builds, is I just run a 2-meter USB-C cable from the back of the ATEM Mini, which is obviously on the floor in the rack, and I just have it poking and coming out of the producer desk, and that is there so that when a producer sits down, they can just easily plug in a hard drive for recording without having to scramble to the back of the rack and try and plug one into the back of the ATEM Mini. That cable is there already for them to use. Then on the top shelf, there's a Mac Mini, which runs all of the crucial software like ATEM Software Control, X32 Edit, and most crucially, BitFocus Companion. But as I mentioned, a second display from that Mac is also connected to ATEM input number 6, and that allows the producer to use that second display to show videos, photos, or even bring in remote guests. And that input can be routed directly to the on-set monitor for the talent to see. The Mac is also connected via USB to the X32 rack, which is how it sends its audio to the audio mixer, but it also opens up the functionality for us to be able to do multi-track recording on the Mac if we want to. Next to the Mac in the rack is an 8-port network switch and a GL iNet Wi-Fi 6 router. This allows us to create and manage the set's own network and for everything to be on its own static IP address so that we're not conflicting with anything else that might be going on in the wider building. The Wi-Fi router also puts out its own Radio Rufus Wi-Fi network, which is actually key in this set because we heavily utilize smart plugs for it to turn on and off things like practical lighting, all of the cameras, the screens, and even the rack itself. And that's where the final key piece of tech comes in. The Elgato Stream Deck. Everything is run from this thing, and it's what allows us to house and hide all of the broadcast kit away and just have one piece of technology sitting in the corner of the desk that will never be caught on camera. So when a producer comes in to film an episode, all they do is sit down in this chair, press these buttons to turn everything on, and then they've got their main control page for controlling the ATEM and audio mixer, and they can do things like cutting between cameras, unmuting microphones, selecting what they want to appear on the talent monitor, even starting and stopping a recording. Everything they need to control a show is on one simple unit, and that's all thanks to BitFocus Companion running on the Mac. Now, if you don't know what BitFocus Companion is, it is a fantastic piece of software that allows you to connect up all of your broadcast hardware and software devices and control them using an Elgato Stream Deck or other control surfaces. I'm actually going to do a video in the near future about how I use BitFocus Companion, so if you want to see that, hit the subscribe button. So now you know how it's made, what does the end result look like? Well, Radio Rufus is live now on YouTube, so you can click the link down in my description below or click on the I button in the top right hand corner and check out the latest episode over on their YouTube channel. Now I want to say a final big thank you to the team at the Fellas Studios for getting me involved, but also allowing me to share the behind the scenes of this build with you. So big thanks to them. If you enjoyed the video, please do give it a thumbs up. That really does help algorithm-y stuff as well. Also, if you're new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button for more videos just like this. If you've got a question about the build or the Micro Studio Camera 4K G2, get them down in the comments below. I read through all of them and will reply to as many as possible. And if you need specific help with your setups, my email address is on screen now. You can ping me an email and we'll set up a one-to-one consulting session to get those answered. And once you've done all that, guys, I will see you on the next video.